I need to tough this one out. I can handle it on my own. I need to stop overthinking and just fix it. I need to stop being so soft. Now, these are merely a snapshot of some of the internalized thoughts that many blokes have when it comes to stress and anxiety. Now, life can be full of curveballs, uncertainties, and moments that we simply haven't planned for. Let's face it, how much control do we really actually have? Well, there's a sobering thought. If you've ever been feeling or felt worried or stressed or nervous or anxious, and your brain has a mind of its own racing with overthinking or looping thoughts, this episode is for you. Welcome to Man Talk, a podcast of real conversations about life, your life, our life, and the emotional well-being of men. My name is Todd-Collins. I'm the Director of Men and Relationships Counselling, a psychotherapist and counsellor in private practice. Thank you for being here. Sit back and relax and join me for this latest episode where we uncover the experiences of stress and anxiety from a bloke's perspective. Hello. I hope you are very well wherever you are listening to these dulcet tones going through your ear in some form. Now, sometimes the themes of this podcast can converge with my own life experience, and talking about stress and anxiety following a particularly difficult period in my life may not be that surprising, considering how, well, for most of us mere mortals, the world can be an unpredictable place to live. Let's have a look at how and what anxiety actually means. Now, here's a couple of definitions for you. Now, the American Psychological Association actually has a definition that's worth thinking about. They define anxiety as an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. So this is a normal reaction to stress and can be beneficial in some situations. So what's the difference between that and an anxiety disorder? Now, the National Institute of Mental Health explains that anxiety disorders as a mental health condition is where anxiety becomes excessive, difficult to control, and significantly interferes with daily activities. Now, these disorders will then differ from this kind of more general, normal feelings of nervousness or anxiousness or stress, and they involve prolonged periods of intense anxiety, something that's worth thinking about in your own experience. If you've been carrying these kind of anxiety symptoms for more than 4 to 6 weeks, then it's definitely worth getting some help. Now, this episode probably fits into that first definition of a more generalized anxiety. But what interests me the most is when I'm working with blokes, many of whom have carried these internalized thoughts and feelings about stress and their anxiety and have rarely, if ever, spoken about them. They've been carrying these feelings, in some cases, for years, 10, 15, 20 years or so. So what happens when you're stressed or anxious? How does your mind, how does your body tend to react? For most of us, when we experience stressful or anxious situations, the brain triggers what's called a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. Now, the fight response is your body's way of facing a perceived threat more aggressively. Flight means literally your body is saying, run away. Freeze is when you're kind of stuck. Your body has that inability to move. You're actually frozen against the threat. And fawn, if you've not heard about fawn before, fawn is the way your body's stress response is releasing something around managing conflict by avoiding or pleasing the situation. And that particularly happens in a lot of relationships. Now, this all starts in your brain, in your amygdala, which signals to your hypothalamus to release those stress hormones, which I'm sure you've heard about, cortisol and adrenaline. Now, these hormones prepare your body for these reactions and these actions, increasing your heart rate, tightening your muscles, and quickening your breathing. Now, this response, of course, is useful for immediate danger. Long-term anxiety that keeps the body, though, in this heightened state often causing fatigue and headaches and tension. Now, many blokes actually find it quite difficult to recognize stress and anxiety. Instead, most blokes acknowledge anxiety by kind of interpreting their experience as just being stressful, or they're frustrated, or they're feeling the physical discomforts like headaches or gut aches and so on. So let me just begin at this very start of this episode by saying to you that whatever you're recognizing in your own experience of stress and anxiety, don't let it sit within you, either in your brain or in your body, for too long. Please go and talk to somebody or go and see a mental health professional. Now, let me introduce you to a guy called Tom. Now, as you will know by now, for this series of the Man Talk podcast, Tom is indeed a figment of my imagination. He's not a real person, but he is an amalgamation of many a good bloke and many men who I'm still talking to about how stress and anxiety in particular emerge in his life and the impact of that, and most importantly, what on earth to do about it. Imagine Tom. Now, maybe this is you. Maybe your name is actually Tom. That would be excellent. For now, let's say you're Tom. Anyhow, Tom is in his mid to late 40s. He's got a couple of kids under 10. He's been married for about 13 years. He is a warrior. He's also, as it turns out, a bit of a warrior, and we'll get to that a bit later on in the episode. Now, Tom would talk about all the things that made him worry and made him anxious. He would often find himself lying awake at night, overthinking every little detail about his life, his job, and his relationship. He played over and over various conversations he's had or will have with his work colleagues. He would worry about whether he was a good enough partner. He would be often thinking about whether he was doing enough to keep his partner happy. He also wondered if his wife loved him. He worried about even talking about that with her. He would also worry about money, and he would go over in his head the forensics of financially living life daily. Is he earning enough? Is he saving enough? He would wonder and wish that his wife would stop spending so much money, and he would wonder how to pay for the kids' schooling. He'd also worry about whether he had enough time to get everything done. He has a never-ending list of things to do. Now, this constant state of worry clearly affected his sleep, which then also affected his work performance and generally affected his overall well-being. He would describe a kind of constant feeling of a knot in his stomach, and occasionally he would have a sense of impending doom that was very difficult to shake off. Now, during the day, Tom's anxiety would sort of creep in to sort of mundane activities. Any kind of simple disagreement with his wife would spiral into a full-blown panic for him about their future together. He would start to avoid conversations. So that's the fawn part of his brain that I was mentioning earlier. He would just avoid the conflict. And that in its own way would make him feel more disconnected and more isolated. Now, I wonder if you can relate to any of these experiences that Tom was talking about to me. How do you cope with this? And how does it affect your relationship? So it's no surprise, really, that stress and anxiety will deeply affect men and their relationships. Men have certain common patterns that tend to show up when they're dealing with stressful or anxious moments in their lives. Now, there are some blokes that tend to withdraw emotionally. They become a bit more aloof or more standoffish. This is the kind of flight response that I was explaining to you earlier in the episode. And there's some blokes who become more irritable, more moody. They're kind of ready for a fight. That's the fight response. And there are some blokes that do all of this, even within a given day, that they move between these patterns all the time. Now, do you see yourself in any of those? It's important to start to reflect on where you go in response to some of these feelings that you have, mainly because these patterns create more distance and more emotional disconnection. And they are certainly a great cause of frustration, confusion, and tension within ourselves, and often lead to more conflict in our relationship with our partners. Now, in my conversations with blokes, there are so many men that internalize stress. We isolate ourselves or we distract ourselves. It's that kind of bottling up avoidance part of our brain. We use distraction as a short term escape. Now, in general, women, on the other hand, are much better at seeking out emotional support. They will talk about it. They will share their stress with other people. It's a way that they alleviate tension. But it's also really important for a lot of women that I meet that this openness leads to more supportive friendships and more connection with their partners. Alternatively, because blokes don't talk enough, we will often feel more isolated in a relationship. And significantly, there are many women that I'd speak to who will feel like they're being unsupported and in fact believe their partners don't care when their partner is actually withdrawing. And that is often far from the truth. So for you, check in with this dynamic within yourself and how and if any of these patterns apply to your relationship. Even if the roles are reversed, if you're the talker and your partner's more withdrawn, start to talk about this pattern and start to think about different ways to address it. The impact on relationships is huge. When we suppress emotion and avoid communication, it creates more cycles of misunderstanding, but also more negative ways of communicating. There are many women who feel unheard, often feel unimportant, which intensifies the conflict if their partner is uncaring, withdrawing, and isolated. So if men are more open about stress, if we are willing to communicate more, it's likely to lead to more emotional intimacy and that mutual support that can be really important. So what can you do together as a couple that's different? I want you to consider how much time you're spending with your partner and how much empathy you are able to develop and use within your communication style, how actively listening you are, and how willing you are to be more open with your partner about your own experiences of stress and anxiety. Managing stress together as a team is much better than dealing with it in isolation. So what more can you do to look after and calm your fears? And one of the first things I want you to consider is your own belief system. Hello. I'm sorry for interrupting this episode. I'm just dropping by, firstly, to ask you a question. What do you think the most common complaint most men and women make about their relationship? Well, it's communication problems. You thought I was going to say sex, didn't you? Well, that is actually a close second. But so many men in particular complain that they get tongue-tied and twisted when trying to communicate or open up with their partner, and often they end up shutting down or just saying the wrong things. So what is good communication in a relationship, I hear you ask? I'm so glad that you did. Well, I've actually created a free guide, Better Conversations for Blokes. It's a quick and easy guide to improving communication in your relationship. It's got heaps of tips and tricks and skills and actual phrases that you can use right now. It's made just for you. You can get the free guide in the show notes. Finish the episode and check out the show notes and find a way of improving your communication with your partner right now. When we're looking at tips and tools to make changes, it's very simple, first of all, to look at some ideas of what you can do differently, and we will go there shortly. But before that, I tend to think that it's worth paying attention to any kind of limiting beliefs that are getting in your own way. We've all been brought up to have certain kinds of belief systems. They come from our family of origin, they come from our culture, from our gender, and so on. So I'd like you to have a bit of a think about this for yourself in terms of managing stress and anxiety in your life? For example, are you the kind of bloke that thinks that anxiety is something you should just push through? Are you the kind of guy that worries about being judged for being vulnerable so you don't show up in being more open in your relationship? Are you the kind of guy that feels the pressure that you just should have life under control? Do you have this expectation of maintaining some kind of image of being strong and stoic? Or do you believe that really any kind of personal issues that are going on are really private and you should face it all on your own? So just consider what beliefs you have that are workable for you, that help you, help you to work through things in a more open, more connected, more supportive way. Or are there certain beliefs that are really keeping you in patterns that don't work for you as well? Now, some ideas about managing anxiety and stresses and what to do about it are relatively straightforward. And I go through some of them now. You'll probably think, well, I've done that before, or that's pretty obvious. And most of these things are fairly obvious, but there's all sorts of reasons why we don't do them. And some of those limiting beliefs are the ones that get in the way. One of the first things to think about in terms of stress and anxiety is knowing what your triggers are. What are you worrying about? And in particular, what kind of triggers are creating certain reactions within you? Try and be as specific as you can as you think about this. What parts of your life are triggering your fears, your worries, and your anxieties? Is it parenting? Is it money? Is it your job? Is it your relationship? Is it the way you feel about the world, the way you feel about yourself? If you can identify the cause of some of your stress, it will begin to help you address it. Now, for Tom, he certainly began to realize, as you can imagine, that his anxiety was spiked by all sorts of things about his own expectations of pressure on himself, also his work commitments and the conflicts with his partner, and certainly began to realize that there were certain patterns that he began to notice. He started to write them down. He created a kind of journal for his own triggers, which helped him in some way prepare himself for difficult conversations, but also began to understand the sort of things that he needed to calm his own mind. And he began to become much more aware, but also anticipate moments that would help him from being less reactive. He created some new ideas, but also some new strategies to manage some of these feelings. And the most obvious one is about communication. He began to realize that he was internalizing and withdrawing from his partner and had stopped talking to her about what was going on for him. So he began to readdress that with his partner. He created space and time to talk. He started fairly slowly, but he started talking about the fact that he's got a lot on his mind and he wants to start sharing them a lot more with some regular times to check in. He began to realize that the more open he was, the more supportive and more caring his partner was towards him. He began to feel much more understood and less alone. Now, him and his partner created a kind of regular routine. Maybe this is something you can do if you're in a relationship, a regular check-in, once a week even, where they would sit together uninterrupted, talk about what they were feeling, how they were going in life, what concerns they had, and what needs they had. This kind of open communication prevented some of the bigger misunderstanding in Tom's life and certainly reduced his anxiety. So start talking more, take the pressure off yourself, and see whether you can help your partner to understand your experience. Another idea, which is something that we tend not to think about so much as blokes in particular, is how we understand our nervous system, what is going on when we're overwhelmed with stress. As I was mentioning earlier in the episode, we know the nervous system has all these responses. The brain kicks into gear, right? The nervous system needs regulating when we're overwhelmed. So things like techniques to breathe better, to be more mindful, to learn meditation, to do things that actually give you a chance to slow down and take a breath. Now, Tom began to do this in his own life, in his own therapy with me. I taught him some meditating, mindfulness-based skills he could do anywhere. And he began to do it 10 minutes every morning to start the day with a calm mind. And he would incorporate these things into his daily routine. So have a think about what you're doing. There are plenty of guided meditation apps out there. We make all sorts of excuses not to use them because we're too busy, haven't got time, or it's too hard. Start to consider, though, what time that you need to regulate your nervous system during the day. And in particular, in your relationship with your partner, start looking at moments where you're creating time with each other, where you're not so pressured to resolve issues straight away, where you can help to reduce the emotional strain in some way. Now, there are a few more things that I want you to consider in looking after yourself. There are a number of really important things that I often talk to men about when it comes to seeking out more understanding about their stress and anxiety and what kind of help they may need. One of the first things is about dealing with the isolation of what happens for men in particular, to consider what kind of support system you may have in your life that can actually be beneficial to you. Now, Tom would speak to me about his friendships, and some of the friends that he had were really good at people that would listen to him and kind of understand what he was going through. So he would reach out to his friends. There was a few family members that he could speak to and some that he didn't. So he could talk about what he was going through in terms of stress. So it helped him to feel a bit more supported and a bit less isolated. So consider for yourself what kind of support system you have that just helps you to get some different perspectives, even some practical advice if you need it, which may help you to navigate stress and anxiety more effectively. So knowing that you have people to turn to will reduce the isolation of this kind of experience. The other thing is to think about educating yourself. What do you understand of anxiety? There are plenty of books and articles out there that are kind of useful to read, to understand the whole idea of the physiology of anxiety, for example, or the psychological aspects of anxiety, to kind of demystify some of the symptoms and maybe feel like it's less intimidating. Education provides strategies as well. So techniques to manage anxiety could be really useful to actually read about. Plenty of YouTube things out there, lots of stuff that can be quite useful. The other thing to consider is what kind of help you actually need. Is it a combination of things? Do you want to become more emotionally aware? Do you want to improve your communication skills, to learn more of these coping strategies on a regular basis? Do you know something more about the fact that you're not doing enough physical activity to help you to incorporate exercise or to reduce stress and anxiety? So go and seek out some physical exercise. Or do you need more consciously focused professional kind of support like coaching or counselling or therapy? These strategies are all designed to get you to think about a healthier way of looking after your stress, looking after your anxiety, and overall looking after your emotional well-being. Now, we've covered quite a lot in today's episode around stress and anxiety. I do want you to consider, though, something that's really useful for you that you know that's come out of this conversation that is for you to really take some responsibility for. Pay some attention to some of those limiting beliefs that may well get in your way. And just remember that it's okay to feel the anxiety and stress of life. The reality is that we all go through it. Most of us come out of it. We go through in and out of moments of our lives that can be quite overwhelming. It's so important to consider what kind of patterns that you're creating for your own well-being that are working for you, as well as what's working against you. You are not alone in this space. There are plenty of resources available to help you. If it's becoming too much to handle, consider what you need. Maybe relationship counseling could be useful for both of you and your partner around this, or maybe individual therapy will help you to give you some more ways to cope with understanding stress and anxiety and how to make the changes that you need. Now, I'd love to hear about your thoughts about this. In particular, you can look at the Instagram account, Man Talk with Howard. You can send me a message or a note. If this episode does spark your interest, check the show notes. There are some online products available and programs that can help you to make sense of yourself and your relationship with anxiety and stress. There is a booking button to come and work with me around your anxiety and stress if you so need. Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, please tell your mates. Give me a review of wherever you found the podcast, and I look forward to speaking to you again in the next episode of Man Talk.